Hello, and welcome back to Plant Revelations. It's January, it's really cold, and what could be better than to lift your spirits in winter, especially if you're in the Northern Hemisphere like us, and the nights are really long, the days are short. Not a lot to do in the garden if you're on top of things, than to sow some seeds that will give us a bit of hope for the season to come and get our enthusiasm back into the garden. So these are some of my top recommendations for seeds and plants to sow in January. Now, before I start, I'm not going to do vegetables. I will give you one tip though. Don't sow your tomatoes now. You've got no business sowing your tomatoes at this time of year because all that will happen is, unless you've got giant Victorian windowsills or something, you're just going to end up with 3 or 4 foot plants that you can't put out until April, end of April if you're lucky, that are just going to end up really leggy. You're much better off sowing end of Feb, March, if you've got a cold greenhouse. Start off on the windowsill and you'll get nice stocky plants that will catch up with your January sowings. So don't do that. But what you can sow are chilies because they need they're very slow growing. They need a nice long season to get cracking and start fruiting to get a decent harvest. You don't need very many, so they won't take up much room on the windowsill, and they are really slow and they need lots of heat to get going because they are truly tropical things. So anyway, let's skip the veg because that's boring, and we'll go to flowers that I recommend. First of all, we'll perhaps have a look at the setup I've got before I start sowing. Right, so as you can see here, we're sowing into 9 centimetre square pots, and the ones in the grey are about 30% wash sand, the rest is sieved multi-purpose mixed together. The ones on the left in the black pots have just sieved compost with a little bit of sand mixed in for drainage. Now, use builder's sand or sharp sand or wash sand, and that's because the salt content is low. It's not going to damage seedlings. You can't just use any old sand, of course, so just make sure you can use horticultural grade, but that's a lot more expensive, so I just tend to buy wash builder sand. They've been watered, tamped down, which basically means that it's just been firmed down gently, just to stop any sort of sinkage after watering. And the reason we water it before we do any sowing is because when you water, every time you water your seedlings, you can dislodge the seedlings, especially if they're very fine seedlings. I've also got a bucket here with some very sandy compost to go over the top of the seedlings and some sand, which we'll use for the finer seeds. So why are we sowing into 9 centimetres rather than seed tray? Well, first of all, it'll save us on space. So I can sow 8 different things in this tray. If I just did one seed tray, I could only sow one thing, and I haven't got many windowsills in the house that I'm allowed to use to put on my plants, so that's limited. Second of all, you've got a nice deep root system, so when they do grow, you don't have to worry about potting them on straight away, whereas a seed tray has only got a centimetre or 2. And a lot of plants, they can get stunted if they can't get their roots down really deep straight away, especially some trees and shrubs, some cacti and succulents, palms. Not as bad with some of your annuals that you want to grow. So you've got that depth, and means you can have a variation. And in a 9 centimetre pot, this is a little tip I picked up when I worked at the Botanic Garden, you can get a lot of plants in that. You can probably get 10 to 20 plants in that. And normally, do you need any more than that? Probably not for your garden. You don't really need more than like 20 plants of anything. So you can get a lot in that, and then you can split them. So that's why I go for 9 centimetres. What are we going to grow today? We're going to grow start off by growing some succulents. and some bromeliads. So the succulents I'm growing is something called agave macrocantha, which is supposedly cold hardy agave century plant. Now I did sow some other agaves just down here. You can see did that sowed those about a year or two ago, and they really need splitting and giving a new pot. But these are going to make quite big architectural succulents that I'll have in pots. If I lived in somewhere like Cornwall or London, I could probably grow these outside on a rockery in a very free draining dry sheltered spot. But here it's going to be a greenhouse job. You should them in the greenhouse in the winter, which they should take, and then pop them out on the patio in the summer. Now, what we do when we're sowing seeds to get a nice even coverage, we pour it on my hand like that. And these are actually quite big, so we can just place these individually, get as many as we can, so long as they're not touching. Because that means if one of your seedlings goes rotten, it won't spread to the others. So give plenty of space in between your seedlings, which you can do when you're sowing big ones. I think that's about. Don't think we can really ram any more in that. So there you can see the seedlings are nice and evenly spaced. And now what we'll do is just put another thin layer of sand on top. Plastic bag on. Label, of course, what it is. The date you sowed it. So, because it's very easy if you're sowing a lot of stuff like me to get things mixed up and forget what they are. So then we just sprinkle a very, ideally you would sieve this. Very thin layer of sand, just covering it. In fact, you probably don't even need to cover it. This is really just to stop the seeds moving about. Will get dislodged when you're walking around, for example. You're not going to water these from the top. If they do need a water, because sometimes seeds take a long time to germinate, like months, sometimes years, then you're going to sit it in a dish of water for an hour or two, let it soak the water up, and then place it back in your tray. Do not water from above until they have started growing quite substantially, and you can water them without dislodging the seedlings. The next thing I want to sow is something called Hoya Beron. I'm probably butchering this name. I always say Hoya Beron, but I think it's Hoya Beron. Anyway, it's a beautiful, hardy bromeliad, which we did used to grow outside Oxford Botanic Gardens on the rockeries there, and it flowered successfully. Again, if you live in the milder parts of the UK, you'll get away with this outside. I have had it outside for 3 or 4 years before I lost it. It has the most amazing turquoisey flowers. So it's a hardy bromeliad. It'll look, when it grows, it'll look a bit like this, get a lot bigger than that. And the flowers are absolutely stunning. Really unusual plant, worth having a go. But the seed on here is very fine, very fine. See how fine the seed is? What we do is we gently tap, put it on the palm of your hand, the seed there. You gently tap like that, and then the seed will gradually come out in ones and twos. You can't really hand sow this because you just won't get an even distribution. It's just the seed's too small, it'll stick to your fingers. So we just try and make sure that the surface is evenly covered. You are going to get some touching, unfortunately, because the seed is so small. And again, we'll very finely sieve over a very thin layer of sand. So the process is very similar to the agave, but on a smaller scale. So the next thing we're going to sow are dahlias. Now, dahlias are great for sowing this time of year because if you sow them in January, February time, you've got that nice long growing season, they'll develop tubers that you can overwinter the following year. And this is some old seed I've got hanging about, and this is actually a dahlia called Dahlia cochineal. It's a species type. And I'm going to sow this straight onto the compost because it's much less prone to rotting off. It has really nice deeply cut foliage and single blood red flowers. I've actually grown this outside for many years and it keeps coming through the winter. So it is sort of semi-hardy. Now this is old seed. There is a good chance it might not come up, but we're going to give it a go and see what happens. Now I will again lightly cover that with a thin layer of sandy compost just to try and stop the little seedlings rotting off, and that should do the trick. The much bigger seed often, in my experience, is much less likely to rot off. The other thing you've got is something called a canna, or the Indian shot plant. Now, these are really interesting. They basically will make a lovely exotic plant with paddle-shaped leaves, a bit like a banana, and beautiful striking flowers. This one is Canna brasiliensis. I think it's also known as speciosa, but I got it in originally as brasiliensis. We used to grow these a lot. The seed is 15 years old. They found canna seed in Argentinian tombs, which are thousands of years old, and they managed to get them to germinate. So I'm not worried that this seed is 15 years old. Now it's literally hard as bullets, which is why it gets the name Indian shot plant. It's not actually from India. They're actually from Central and South America. And these do require a bit of treatment. What you do is you get a pair of nail clippers, and you can actually, because they are so hard, clip the outer casing of the shell and then pour some, not quite boiling water, but hot water on them. Within 24 hours, they'll double in size, and then I'll sow them direct into here, about the depth of the seed. I'll do a close-up of these in a minute. So what's amazing about these is that they used to be called something called Indian shot. Now the rumours are, during the uprising in the Indian Mutiny, is that soldiers would use these as a replacement for shotgun pellets. And the story is that you can actually shoot these through wood and they'll still germinate. That's how rock hard they are. Now cannas, where they come from, are actually used as food. The young leaves are used as food. The plants are used as fodder for animals and stuff. But of course they're really beautiful plants. They actually come from marshy areas, so when they're growing in the summer, keep them nice and damp. So drainage isn't as important with these, so that's why we're going to sow them in the same mix as the dahlias. And I have had these overwinter in the ground for like several years and then lost them, so that's why I'm sowing them again. But you can also sow some of the stunning cultivars from seed if you can pollinate them. last year, I actually sowed some acacias in January time. So if you look at that video, that's another suggestion. And I did some dates, some date palms. So that's another suggestion you can check out for things you can sow in January. Now, any self-respecting gardener will have a pocket full of seeds that they pick up on their travels. And I'm no different. And here I've got a pocket full of all sorts from my walks and stuff around the local park. And there are several Trachycarpus fortunei, which is one of the few hardy palms you can grow in the UK and in cold climates. They're sort of kidney-shaped seeds. I'll do a close-up. And they're really easy to prepare. All you do is take the skins off. They're dead easy to germinate. They just require a bit of heat and moisture. Depending on how old the seed is, it might take a bit longer to germinate. It might take a while. And again, you could probably place about 10 in a pot like this, and they'll come up like blades of grass. But it will take a few months to germinate. It might not even germinate for 6 months. But I'll probably move them into the greenhouse about May, June, take them off the windowsill, but I'll give them a head start, and it means that hopefully by the end of the year, I will have plants, just seeing if I've got some more in here, I will have plants which are able to overwinter in the greenhouse. Having said that, I have actually sown these in a cold greenhouse, and they've come up no problem. So yeah, I've got some more here, as I thought. But I've literally just picked these up off the floor, walking around the park. They're all over the floor. So you can't actually have enough Trachycarpus, in my opinion. Seed, quite big seed. So the bigger the seed, the deeper that will push them in slightly. Again, they're not and I'll probably put a centimetre or two of compost on these. And even if they all germinate, there's still plenty of room for them. So the next seed I'm going to sow is another palm. It's called Shamrock Tumulus. Not as hardy as the Trachycarpus, hardy down to about -10, -15 when it's older. And this is some seed I collected on my travels when I was in Isle of Wight this year. And then Plymouth. And again, it was just off some. This is Shamrock Tumulus, a rather spiky dwarf palm that's multi-stemmed. Really pretty, comes in lots of varieties, silver, dwarf type, dwarf I should say, because they're dwarf anyway. Very slow growing. And their leaf petioles, I don't know if you can see, are viciously spiky. So these are a lot slower growing than Trachycarpus. Now, the seed is a lot bigger. It's important to peel it. I'll do a close-up in a minute. Because the actual fruit shell contains lots of inhibitors and hormones that basically stop the seed from growing. So you peel away the fruit, ideally soak it for 24 hours, and then you can sow it. And you can sow it quite deep, at least the depth of the seed, so about a centimetre deep. And these will germinate in any time between a month, if it's nice fresh seed, which this is, or a month or two, or it could take up to a couple of years if it's old seed. You can speed up the process by putting it in gibberellic acid or sanding the seed coat down until you can see a little bit white, which is, I think it's the endocarp of the seed, but you've got to be careful you don't damage that. So I tend to just sow them and forget about them, because it's easy, especially if you're buying seed. Experiment if you're getting it for free, that's fine. But it's easy to ruin kill your seed by doing such. So same principle, we're going to sow them so they're not touching each other in the pot, and these can be pushed down deep and have about 1 centimetre or 2 of compost. This is what you can expect from your Chamaerops and your Trachycarpus seedlings after a year or two. Very slow growing. It's going to be, and what will, of course, after we've sown the plants, we'll put either a cloche on top, or I might just put clean film over them, or cling film over them, or a Ziploc bag is quite nice. You can just put them in a Ziploc bag, they're self-contained, and then as each one germinates, you can unzip the Ziploc bag. With your seedlings, as they germinate, and they're in this sort of enclosed mini greenhouse, if you like, there's chances that the seedlings will rot off with damping off spores, which is a fungus which will just go off and it'll kill your whole seed tray. So it's important, as soon as they start to come up, or most of them will start to come up and get those primary leaves, which are the first 2 leaves, take the bag off, take the cling film off, and get the air around them, and that should stop you damping off. If you seal them up properly and you've watered them well before, you shouldn't need to water these really till they start to grow, because there should be enough moisture in the pots already. So you can site this tray above the radiator. I don't know if you have radiators in America or Canada. In the UK we have radiators. But if your room's warm, about 20 degrees Celsius, I'll put that down in Fahrenheit below. You can just use a nice bright spot, doesn't matter. That'll be enough. Once you've got the bag on, that'll make it a bit warmer. And that little bit of sunshine coming through the window will warm it a bit higher than your room temperature anyway. Heat mat is great if you've got it, but I know not everyone's got a heat mat. But all of this stuff I'm saying today should grow without a heat mat. So I hope you found that useful. And I will, if I get a chance, update you on the progress of these. I imagine it's going to be quite slow for succulents in the farms. And if you did like this video, please like and subscribe. Please tell me what you're sowing in January, wherever you are in the world. That'd be really interesting to know. And look after yourselves. Ciao, ciao. See you on the next one.